Hey, welcome back. Today we're looking at the dash list that I was actually able to win a skirmish with. So here is the playmat right here. It is the Benji Spring Tidings mat. It somehow looks even cooler in person. Let's see how much I can get that in the camera. It's a really bad way of doing it. But yeah, so won this, won a Prism Cold Foil. There was store credit as well, but I thought it would be a cool way to kind of jump into what this deck looks like post Everfest. Even I'll be honest, even I was a little bit skeptical of the power level of Dash moving into Everfest. Before Everfest, part of the issue with Dash was her damage output was a little bit worse than all the other aggro heroes, and then she also had the downside of being pretty easy to fatigue. The boosting mechanic, which we'll jump into. I'll just give a quick overview for anyone who's not super familiar with the deck as well, while also trying to gear this a little bit more towards maybe more experienced players or people who understand some of the game mechanics a little bit more. But the boost mechanic, requiring you to banish a card every time you wanted to play something with Go again, made it so that it was kind of easy to block her out and eventually have her fatigue. But there's a few cool new, I guess, things to mess around with here that I think kind of fix that. So for anyone who's not familiar with Dash, Dash is a mechanologist hero from Flesh and Blood, and so you can start the game with a mechanologist item in play, as long as it costs 2 or less. So the one that we're going to be choosing almost every time, we only have 2 options in this deck, and it's going to be Teklo Core, which is a 0-cost item, a Dash specialization card, and it enters in with 2 steam counters, so basically 2 counters that you would keep track of with dice. On the start of your turn, you remove 1 and you gain 2 resources, and it hits the graveyard when there's no steam counters left on it. But we're not going to be starting with that. Instead, we're going to be starting with a new Everfest card that we got called Teklo Pounder, and that is a 2-cost mechanologist item. It enters in with 3 steam counters, and a once per turn effective whenever you boost an attack action card, you remove a steam counter, and the attack gains +2. So basically, it's a +2 for the first 3 turns of the game, essentially. Although you can choose to attack and not boost, or you can just choose not to attack at all, and then it kind of sits around until you want to use it. Although in Blitz, we should be pretty proactive with our strategy. It's a pretty big upgrade. Before, we were only using Teklo Core. It was the only really viable item in Blitz, and so you would get 4 free resources jumping into the game, but it was really hard to really get damage through in time, and then the item would go away in 2 turns, and you're kind of left behind with a really suboptimal board state. So I actually think that Pounder is a pretty good answer to some of the issues that Ash has been having. Also, just being able to close out games, going tall enough for some defensive decks, having 2, which I think is absolutely critical in this deck, will allow you to actually stack them on the field, and then your attacks will gain +4 when you boost them, which is really crazy. And then so we'll start with the core list, and then we'll go into the items and weapon choices, because I think there is some interesting things we need to talk about. I think for both, mainly because I just don't see a whole lot of discourse around this hero, at least in the online space. There's stuff in the general Discord, but it is kind of like more of a forgotten hero in Flesh and Blood, and so I think because of that, there are some I guess like there's some conflicting ideas, because people are just trying to put together like the best list they can come up with for this hero, because there's just not a whole lot going on. So to start with the reds, we have High Octane. High Octane is a really important card. In some versions of Dash, I choose to use it in this one because I still think it's a really good card. So High Octane is a 1-cost. It blocks for 3. It's a non-attack action, and whenever you boost a card this turn, you gain 1 action point. So for anyone who's not familiar with the actual boost mechanic, if anyone's new to this hero, boost is a keyword that'll be on certain mechanologist attack action cards, and it's an additional cost to play it. So when you reveal it, when you pitch, and when you play it, you'll then choose if you want to boost or not. And boost is a keyword where you're going to banish the top card of your deck, and if that card is a mechanologist card, the attack that you're playing is going to gain Go again. Now we actually run 100% mechanologist cards. Every card in this deck is a mechanologist card, so you will always hit. You'll always have Go again. So it's pretty cool because it's more of like an aggressive, it does remind me of like a red deck wins kind of style. Although I think certain rune blades like Briar and maybe even Chain, Chain feels different, but I think Briar feels like a red deck wins because Briar also has access to arcane damage, which kind of feels like red deck wins having access to burn spells on top of creatures, but maybe that's a little too far in the weeds. But it's cool. It's a very like aggressive, in your face, you're always going to be pressuring your opponent kind of deck. So whenever you boost here, you're going to get an additional action point, and you'll draw a card, and this says go again. So the reason why it's important is because of our weapon. So our main weapon is called the Teklo Plasma Pistol. To load it, you put a counter on it. So it's a little bit weird, right? It doesn't work like a normal weapon. Most weapons, you pay the resource to attack with it. This one's a bit different. This one, you actually load a counter onto it. So you'll pay 1. If it already has a steam counter, you don't gain anything. The reason why that's relevant is you can actually overpitch to just keep on reloading this. But that's a very niche thing. But basically, you pay 1. It has a steam counter. Then at any point in the game, whether or not you have a resource, you remove that steam counter, and then you actually shoot the pistol for 2. So like you can load this on turn 1, not fire with it, and then the next turn is basically a 0-cost weapon attack because you've already paid to load. But the really fascinating thing is, if you actually notice this, it says, and we'll look at plasma barrel shots. So see how it says once per turn action? You remove the counter and fire. Plasma pistol actually just says action. Doesn't say once per turn. So if the plasma pistol has go again, or if you have additional action points, you can actually fire the weapon as many times as you want, provided that you have the resource to reload it. So basically what will happen is you'll play high octane, you'll boost a card, you get your go again, so you refund your action point. But then because you boosted, you also gain an extra one. So what happens is that you net 1 action point every time. So you play high octane using your action point, it has go again, you refund your action point, you're 1 action point, right? You boost the card. You lose your action point to attack with it, but the attack has go again, and then you get the action point immediately when you boost and you reveal the card. So you then end up with 2 action points. So then you could play another attack, or like let's say then you attack with a pistol, you lose an action point, but now you're at 1, and now you can reload the pistol and fire 1 more time since you have another action point. So what you'll be doing with high octane is you'll be trying to go really wide on the combat chain with multiple boost attacks, and then you're just going to sink a bunch of resources into your pistol and shoot a bunch of individual instances of 2 damage, which doesn't seem like a lot, but in Blitz, every one of those shots is, what, 10% of your opponent's life total? I mean, it's like actually really, really good. And it opens up lines where you can do like 20 damage in a turn, which was something I did in my finals match in the skirmish that won, which is also uploaded on the channel if you're interested. I had a high octane turn that did 23 damage because at the very end, after boosting 3 times, I took 1 blue and I pitched it into the Foundry Heart, which we'll talk about when we get to equipment. And I ended up getting 4 resources, and then I shot the pistol like 4 times off of 1 blue. So that was basically, what, a 3 for 8 or something like that? I don't know. It's crazy, but really good. So high speed impact, 1 for 4 with boost, so probably have go again. If it hits the next attack that you boost on the combat chain gains dominate. That's important. So if you close the combat chain for any reason, like if you activate Foundry Heart, which is a non-attack action, or you play Rotary Ram or something like that, then you'll actually lose that dominate effect. So you have to be careful with this one. Overloop is a really cool card. It's a 2 for 5 with boost, and if it hits, it goes on the bottom of your deck. It's really nice as a recursion effect. Also keeps your deck count a little bit bigger because you are worried about boosting too much and eventually running out of cards in your deck. And it's also nice to redraw that red late game. Overblast is a really cool card where it gains plus X on its attack, where X is the amount of times you boosted. So we have a lot of really low cost boost cards, like 0s and 1s. And so if you're able to play both of those and maybe play an Overblast, all of a sudden now it's a 2 for 7 or a 2 for 8. Moving on to a card that I need to get this across loud and clear. Payload is one of the best cards that Mech gained in Everfest. I'm willing to die on that hill. I'm willing to talk about it. This card is insane. I think if you're not playing it in Dash, you should be playing it in the control version in CC. You should be playing it in the boost version in CC, and you should be playing it absolutely 100% in the Blitz list. This card is absurd. So Payload is a 2 for 6. The blocks for 3, and if you boosted this combat chain, Payload gains dominate. And the reason why this is relevant is because part of the issue with Dash is that what will happen is that you'll boost too much. You go through your opponent's life total, but now your items are gone. Teclopowder only has 3 counters on it. And so you'll get your opponent down to 2, and now all of a sudden you're just drawing blues. You're drawing all the blues you used to pitch. You just can't get over the top. If they keep on they're forced to block you out. But what will happen is that your deck's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker because you'll start hitting that blue concentration you used to pitch for all these really aggressive attacks in the early game. And then your opponent will just accidentally fatigue you, not even intentionally. So you need this card. Also, with the addition of Goliath Gauntlet in our equipment slot, you can buff it up to 8. But you'll have to be careful with the combat chain, right? Because the problem is if you play a 2 cost before, then that will get the +2. But like late game, you can play one of these 0 cost. I mean, even a blue. You could break Goliath Gauntlet before the chain opens, play a blue 0 to 60, and then play a payload for 8 with Dominate. Card needs to be in here. It's insane. It's a strict replacement for Maximum Velocity, which is a near impossible card to pull off. And even then, I feel like doesn't do that much. So yeah, card's good. Please play it. Please try it out. I promise it'll pay off. Rotary Ram is another inclusion from Everfest that I'm still like kind of starting to form an opinion on, but I still don't really have too much to say on it. But it is a nice recursion effect because if you boosted, the +3 buff goes on to the next mech card, but then Rotary Ram goes back on the bottom. I only like it in addition with Overloop because what you can do is you can play a card. Maybe you even start with Overloop, right? So let's say you boost Overloop, it hits, so it goes on the bottom of the deck. You play Rotary Ram onto the next card that you're boosting. Let's say it's just this one. Rotary Ram and Overloop go back on the bottom of the deck together, which then becomes a 2 for 8, right? Or like, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a 2 for 8. So I like them if you're going to use them in addition with each other, because I actually really like the kind of recursion effect that it does. But outside of that, I think that's like the only real exception. And we have all the throttles here. So we're going to have red, yellows, and blues. They're all really good. Even the blue is a 2 for a 4, which is a break point, which is sometimes all you need to close out the game late game when they're at 1. Really good card. 0 to 60, also here in the rainbow. So it's great. It's a 0 cost. It works really well with high octane. It's just a nice aggressive card. The red one is really strong too. It's a 0 for 4 with Go again because it has boost. And to wrap it up with the reds, we're also running all the colors of Zipper Hit. Zipper Hit's fantastic, a 1 for 5, or if we have Teclopowder, you can add 2 to all these boost cards. Right now, Overloop is a 2 for a 7, Throttle is a 2 for an 8, 0 to 60 is a 0 for a 6, which fits the name, ironically. Zipper Hit's a 1 for a 7. Crazy stuff. So yeah, so we're running all of those. The yellow one's also really good on a break point as well. Moving into the yellows, we've already covered 3 of them. Really good card to have in the deck is Spark of Genius. It's another dash specialization, non-attack action. It's a tutor for XX, and you'll search your item for a Mechanologist card with that cost. Put it in the arena, and then if you boost it, you'll draw a card. So it's kind of nice if you boost it, and then maybe you play Spark of Genius, and let's say you had no cards left in hand, you'll draw a card, you'll get to put it in Arsenal. So it's nice how it'll actually still kind of give you a little bit of card advantage. It is nice to just play it for 0, grab a Tecla Core, grab a card for Arsenal maybe. But you can also use it, like if you get lucky on turn 1 and you draw it, you just go find your second Teclopowder, pass turn, maybe with a card in Arsenal, maybe a counter on the pistol. It's super good. It needs to be in the deck, especially with Kasai. Having non-attack actions to block to keep the Centauri Sabers from gaining a buff effect is also really sweet. Moving on to the blues, we have another Overloop. It's just nice. It's just another attack card. There's not really much point. I mean, the blues are mostly here to pitch, and then you're going to have to play them eventually late game to try to start to close it out. When you start redrawing them, hopefully you'll just start banishing them too. So hopefully your hand isn't too concentrated. But it's mostly here for resources because this deck has such a high number of 2 costs. So that's a reason for Overloop. It could be a lot of other things, but I think having attacks is really important in this deck, especially with things like Teclopowder. I mean, if it's out, you play it and it actually gets upgraded to the red one, right? Because then it becomes a 2 for 5. Same thing with High Speed Impact. It's also just nice late game. Like, they're going to be forced to block it because if they're low, they can't afford to take... The 2 is not relevant, but if they're low enough, then the Dominate does become relevant. So that's good. They'll draw a card from the late game. It's not bad. We've already covered Tecla Core. It's just a nice resource. Card you have to be careful. It doesn't block, but in this deck, hopefully we're not blocking too much anyway. And we've already covered these cards down here. They're just... I mean, this deck is really simple. I have a lot of gameplay on the channel, kind of documenting it. It mostly is just about how you're going to choose to pressure when it's the right time to do so, and just kind of like sort of just like navigating the combat chain, like knowing how to kind of bait your opponent to using armor when it's the wrong time and punishing them for it. Or yeah, there's just all, I mean, there's nuances of how to play an aggro deck efficiently in Flesh and Blood, but there's not really anything too complicated with the card pool. It's mostly just damage. So okay, hey, I'm here to re-record the equipment and sideboard loadout. I think when I did my first take, I probably spent too much time talking about the choice between which pistol, and probably a little bit too much time ranting about, I guess, some like discourse that's happening about the best weapon to use in Dash. So I'm just gonna keep it like really brief and really like clear and concise. So this is the second take that's going to be edited into the first video. So to start with the weapon slot, which I think is probably the most important, there's a few different, I guess, schools of thought on the deck that are kind of floating around. So it seems like recently a lot of people have moved away from the Tecloplasma pistol, which is interesting for a number of reasons. Mainly the biggest replacement that people are advocating for is an old weapon, also from Crucible of War. Well, this is from Arcane Rising, but an old Crucible of War weapon called the Plasma Barrel Shot. The reason why people are seeming to prefer this weapon is because of its attack value. So the attack value is actually X is equal to 1 plus the amount of times you boost on the combat chain. So let's say you boosted, you know, maybe let's say you boosted 3 times somehow, right? You had a blue pitch. Let's say you just pitched a Teclo pist or Teclo pounder or something, a blue pitch, right? And you already loaded the counter on it, which requires 2. So maybe you loaded it on the previous turn, and now you get to boost once, boost twice, boost 3 times, and now your barrel shot comes in for 4 at the end of that chain. It came in for resources, but you paid those resources on a separate turn. I understand the reasoning behind wanting that. It seems like a fun explosive card, but what I have actually seen in my testing and my practice, and even just playing it at the skirmish, there were 2 matches where I literally thought that, like, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna try this because I actually really need to see for myself in the competitive environment what this card is like, or else like I don't think I'm gonna be able to form an actual opinion on it. And after all of that, I don't think it's good. I think it's inefficient. I think it's a downgrade to running the plasma pistol. It seems like a fun explosive card, and if that's the reason why you're running it, then I think that's okay. But at least for myself personally, I want to find the most competitive version of this deck, the most optimized, most streamlined. And part of that is just because the hero's already kind of weak, and I really like the hero, so I want to play the hero to the best of my ability. I want to play the hero as efficiently as I can, and I just don't think that the barrel is the way to go. And there's a few reasons why. The first is that because it cares about how many times are on, how many boosts are on the chain, right? It says this combat chain, this is a very important keyword. Tekla Foundry Heart is a non-attack action. There's a lot of non-attack actions in the deck now, right? Because now you have cards like, now you have cards, let me just search this. Now you have cards like Rotary Ram, right? That breaks the chain. If you were somehow resource starved and you need to activate Foundry Heart, now all of a sudden Barrel Shot says, hey, where'd all those boost cards go? So now all of a sudden it doesn't really do any damage. It's extremely expensive to use. 2 resources a lot, and on average what I notice is that most of the time it's coming in for 3 damage, which is really inefficient. It's actually a good block for your opponent, and a 2 for 3 is nothing impressive at all. A 2 for 3 that really that is very fragile is also bad. Even a 2 for 4 that is fragile and extremely conditional is also not good. I prefer a much more reliable 1 resource for 2, no questions asked about the plasma pistol. Also, the fact that, I don't know if anyone's noticed this, but I noticed it the hard way, that Plasma Barrel Shot is a once per turn action to attack, which means that you can't do anything like late game. Maybe you like attack with a pistol, your opponent has no cards left in hand, they're at 1, they have no armor left, and so you can just use your Achilles, get an action point, reload the pistol, and shoot 1 more time for the win. Just having a floating resource or something. You can't do anything crazy like that with a barrel shot. You can't attack multiple times on a high octane turn. So I just like the plasma pistol a lot more. It feels much more reliable. It gives you access to also just the same amount of damage on average with these high octane turns. And it's also just really great because it's an inefficient block for your opponent. Blocking 2 is a lot better for you. Well, having to block 2 is a lot better for you, right? Because if you attack 3 times on a high octane turn, then your opponent can't really efficiently block that, right? Unless if they just want to lose their entire hand for not even a whole lot of damage. So it's, you just kind of win in that exchange, right? It's why the Kodachis are like a really good ninja weapon. It's because they're very taxing. If you decide to block them, you actually are really down on card advantage and just sort of the numbers game, right? Because now all of a sudden you're blocking 3 on a 1, which is the same thing with the pistol. You're blocking 3 on a 2. And if that thing can attack multiple times, then your opponent can't really find a good way to block it out unless if they're running a very specific loadout that can handle it, right? Like the Ram Shield and Guardian. And I just don't see that in the barrel. I don't really see any of those lines. The reason why the barrel is in here is actually just because of one reason, and it's just because of Oldhim. Because of Oldhim, he shuts down the plasma pistol really effectively, even though sometimes they are going to be running Stalagmite now. So if you know they're going to run Stalagmite, you can probably actually still just run normal plasma pistol. But into traditional Ram Shield builds, barrel's really good because you can load it, you can boost a bunch of times, and you're not going to ever allow them to reblock with the Ram Shield, and you can just end the chain. Maybe it's only for 3, maybe you get lucky and it's 4, but that's much better into Oldhim than running the plasma pistol, but it's the only reason it's in the deck. Or maybe you have an extremely polarizing matchup that's super aggro focused and you have to rush your opponent as fast as possible, and you only think your attack with a weapon one time, and you're on the play. That's the most important thing, is that if you can actually get away loading and paying 2 resources for this, and you think you're going to win on like turn 2 and you never need to shoot again, and you're 100% confident in that, that's the only time I think it's acceptable, which is why I decided to test it out. And even in that circumstance, I almost still wish that I had plasma pistol. So I saw people talking about Talishar. I kind of feel the same way about Talishar. I do kind of understand some of the reasoning. I'm just not very interested in the card, so I'll leave it at that. Typical loadout slot is going to be Arcanite Skullcap, which is just usually going to be a 2 with Battle Worn, so a block for 3. Sometimes we'll give you Arcane Barrier. Tekla Founding Heart is a really good card in Mechanologist. It's a once per turn action where you pay 1, you banish the top 2 cards, you get 1 for each Mechanologist card boosted this way. And 100% ratio of mech cards, basically you're always going to be netting 1 resource. So if you pay 1, you get 2 back at the end, so you go up 1 resource. So it's just a nice way to have resources. You will have to be careful with it though, because you are banishing cards, which can accidentally fatigue you. With a block 3, I think it's really important in a really fast format like Blitz. Goliath Gauntlet allows you to buff up attacks, which is really good. Not much more to say there. You can put it on payload if you have the right hand to set it up. And Achilles Accelerator, it's like a really cool card that I enjoy a lot in mech. The way it reads is that in an instant you can destroy it and gain an action point if you boost it this turn. It also has Arcane Barrier 1 built into it, which makes if you run Visiatronic, which is a sideboard piece for Wizard, along with Northern Gloves, all of a sudden Arcane Barrier 4 is like super reasonable for the deck. Or you just can run, I mean, this is a loadout you want into most matchups, and even this can like work in Eviscerate, right? You don't have to pay any Arcane Barrier attacks. The additional action point allows you to play around things like Blizzard. If they Blizzard you or something, like if you're against Icelander or Lexi, you can actually just say no if you want, if it's the right time. You can just say, no, I won't pay, and then you break the Achilles, you get an action point, and then you essentially got go again anyway. So that's really cool. What else? What else is important about this card? Allows you to shoot 2 times with a pistol late game. If that's what you need to win the game, you can play 2 cards that don't have boost back to back. So you can play like Overblast into Payload, or you can do Payload Dominate on the reaction link, break it, and then do a second payload without closing the chain. So that's really cool. And I think it opens up a lot of really sweet lines in this deck. I think this is the most complicated card you'll be using every single game. Even now, I still ask myself, like, was that the right time to break Achilles? Even in a Wizard, when it gets even more exciting, where it's like once you break it, then all of a sudden, or even a Viscerai, once you break it, then all of a sudden it's a huge liability. Now you can't pay for Rune Chance anymore. Now you can pay 1 less for Arcane Barrier and Decano. So it's a cool card. I really enjoy it. Visiatronic is a cool budget option. If you don't have Arcanite Skullcap, it just filters cards. You'll break and you'll filter cards when you boost. but it's mostly here for Arcane Barrier 2 and a Wizard. Ironhide Gauntlet and Ironhide Legs are really only in here for Benji because you have to build a wall of armor for the Spring Tidings turns because it doesn't really do anything outside of that. And that's the only turn you need to really be careful about. You could bring it in for Guardian if you want to, or maybe a hyper aggressive deck. I mean, like maybe you could do it for Rhinar if you think that, if they're on the play and you think they're going to high roll you harder. No Ring Gloves is just kind of in here if you want to go Arcane Barrier 4 and a Wizard if you're going second. And that's pretty much the whole deck. So it's a really fun deck. Low to the ground, aggressive, pretty easy to comprehend and really master because most of it just comes down to how well you're pressuring your opponent, when the right time is, when you're breaking Achilles to get that action point. And so I think it's very easy to get an 80% efficiency with this deck and then like really work hard and have an exciting time trying to get closer to that 90 or 100%. So you're really playing this deck as optimally as you can. So yeah, so that's a Boost Blitz version. Let me know how it goes. If any of you decide to try running this on an armory or anything like that, I'd love to hear about it. Or if there's other additional changes you want to make to the deck, because I think it always is a work in progress with these kinds of decks in Flesh and Blood. So yeah, thank you.